I began riding Sidecar because my dog had separation anxiety when I would disappear on two wheels. So my name is Roy, and I'll be your captain on this voyage of discovery about some modifications to a Watsonian Squire Grand Prix sidecar. The particular sidecar in question I've been riding for 3 years. It is, my tug is a 1998 Thunderbird Sport Triumph 900. I have every reason to believe that the two basically were married at birth. So I imagine these cars are not serial numbered, but I think that's the truth. I think that's it. So long story short, most of the work I've done, I would say in terms of hours, has all been on the tug. But along the way, I've had some important things I wanted to try with the sidecar. And one of those originally was to put a brake on the sidecar. And there's a lot of arguments you can make about whether you should or shouldn't have a brake on a sidecar. And certainly not all cars have brakes, not by a long shot. And those that do have them connected every way you could imagine having them connected. So there's no lack of innovation or experimentation out in the area of hacks. In my case, the wheel I had at that time and gave me the first idea to do this was I had the wheel off a couple of times in the sidecar, and it was all obviously drilled to have a rotor, and so that intrigued me, you know. So it turned out Watsonian has a kit for putting a brake on your sidecar on a 15-inch laced wheel with that's pre-drilled for that. And I got their kit. And I used it for a while, and it didn't work out for me. A kit like that I needed to do a little bit better fabrication to get the lever for the second master cylinder, because this kit would imply that you're going to use your rear brake and the sidecar brake either together or in tandem or balanced by pressing on two levers at the same time, or picking and choosing which lever you want to put your right foot on. Obviously, I'm in America, so my car is on the right. Enough said about that. So I had a hard time coordinating with my right foot, and decided that this was not a good braking system for me. It also the caliper bracket deadlands on the large gland nut on the suspension, and it just rotates away from it in reverse. And on the other hand, it clangs against it when you're in braking in from going straight ahead. And actually, it tended to clang just when you're going down the road. So that was an annoyance that I know I got. If the brake had worked well, I decided right from the beginning that was not such an annoyance that it would be too much for me. But in the long run, since I didn't like the brake, I eventually took all of that off. So this was a workshop I was using, the outdoor workshop at the time. And this is the sidecar, still with the 15-inch wheel on it. We do a couple of quick comparisons, and that's my two-wheeled buggy in the distance there. So the nice thing about that 15-inch wheel was it actually had a sidecar tire on it, or a tire more appropriate for a sidecar wheel. So that tire will grip better in lateral forces than a motorcycle tire will. And for the moment at least, my search for proper tires for 17-inch wheels is stalled. It's a pretty good tread pattern. That tire is actually fairly worn, and I have a new tire that I never even put on there. What you're seeing there is the original Watsonian brake kit. So if you're new to sidecars or didn't already know, not all sidecars have brakes on the sidecar. And excuse me, my dog is underneath me here. And the presence of a brake will change or alter how you ride that sidecar, or at least it'll change or alter how the sidecar handles. If that weren't true, nobody would put a brake on. I have read posts online that people saying, oh, I would refuse to ride a sidecar that didn't have a brake. In any case, I learned very well how to ride my sidecar with no brake. And there can be some very puckering experiences related to doing that. But I eventually got it. And so broadly stated, I can't say that I'm dissatisfied overall with the handling of this sidecar rig. However, there is a question of safety. I can foresee a possible situation requiring some form of emergency braking, wherein the lack of having a brake on the sidecar could end up being a critical factor. So I'm too much of a tinkerer. I like fiddling around with this stuff, so I was going to do this anyway. But it's reasonable to think that that putting the sidecar, the brake on the sidecar, was a worthwhile venture. When first learning to ride sidecar without such brake, any kind of a sudden or emergency stop is a learning experience. And you learn, or you probably decide not to ride sidecar anymore, frankly. So I've already tested it, had a couple of rides now with the brake on there, and my gosh, it surely does make life easier. It does change how I'm going to be riding a bit, but not really in an annoyance fashion. It's more another characteristic I should add of my sidecar is I have conventional motorcycle forks on my tug, and so a long ride or even a short ride can be quite a workout as I go into the gym. And so this will help with that. This actually makes it less of a workout because you don't have to put all that tremendous energy and force into correcting the yaw introduced from the sidecar when you're using the brakes. And so I've already noticed that. So it'll be less of a workout in addition to, I think, being a safer rig. So that's just a little bit more background on that. So there it is. That's the 17-inch wheel. The very first time I ever fit it on the sidecar. Can you believe that? I actually have a little block of wood spacing out the Jubilee above it. You can tell that the castle nut's going to fit just fine with a washer under it, which was the washers required anyway. And there are the two wheels compared to each other, 15-inch laced compared to the 17-inch laced. The 17-inch wheel definitely rolls better. That much I did notice right from the beginning. So to make the situation more spicy, I'm always somebody that wants to tinker and fiddle with things. So, and a friend of mine gave me some spare parts from a Thunderbird project he had worked on at one time. He had these parts left over. It included a complete front end from the triple tree down to the tire. And so that meant it included a 17-inch wheel. I early on grabbed the rotors off his tire because they were better than the rotors that were on my tug when I got the tug. And and those rotors lasted a while, but they eventually, I just recently replaced them. In any case, I had this 17-inch wheel sitting around, and I kept being puzzled. Like, so I wonder what it would be like to put that 17-inch wheel on my sidecar. I'm sure if you're like me, you would have been torn with that idea for a long time. So at this stage of the project, putting a rotor and a wheel cylinder and all the rest of that caliper on there was just kind of a glimmer in my mind, a faint, distant glimmer. There was so much more that would never fit and never work out, and I couldn't fabricate most of the parts that were needed. Unless all those Triumph parts were going to fit. What do you think? Now you got to figure a 15-inch wheel on a Watsonian and a 17-inch wheel from a Triumph. Excuse me, what are the odds, right? I mean, there was no way that wheel was going to fit. The axle would have to be the right length, the sidecar axle, and it would have to be the same diameter as the pin bolt for the front wheel on a Triumph Thunderbird Sport. And then it would have to line up this way with the with everything else. But it did come time one day that I had the 15-inch wheel off, and I was sitting there and I slipped that 17-inch wheel on there, and it fit like it had belonged. In fact, if you put the original spacer that would go on the left-hand side for the Thunderbird Sport at the front suspension, you put that behind the wheel, then the spacing works perfectly for the castle nut on the axle. So I got a new tire on that wheel. I put half-inch spacers in to space out the Jubilee fender, about a half an inch. Seemed to be lined up pretty good, and there you go. Poof! I'm on a 17-inch wheel. It's actually drilled for a brake, for a rotor on both sides. Ergo, the return to the sidecar brake project. So I just ran through some photos here, some shots, really demonstrating how much larger that 17-inch wheel really looks on the car compared to the 15-inch wheel. That's the tire that was on it when I got it. That's not the Marathon that I put on there later. But clearly that tire is quite a bit larger in diameter. It runs narrower. It's a little narrower than the 15-inch wheel. And I liked the way the car sat on it, though, that's for sure. It just looked good. It looked right to me somehow. And I had no idea how this was going to handle or anything. I can go into some of those details, but to be honest, it made differences, but not huge differences. So not to labor the point, but you can see that spacer on the axle. That spacer goes right where against the wheel, the original wheel, 17-inch wheel, just where it was supposed to go. And that big gland nut on the top left is where the Watsonian kit used to land and make a clattering sound. Here you can see the half-inch spacers and slightly longer bolts that went in to space out the Jubilee fender slightly farther out from the body of the car. And of course I touched up the paint as well. That's a necessary thing. I also finally got all the grease fittings properly sorted out on the suspension. Fortunately, it looks like everything's in good condition. There's no free play or anything in the suspension. Now we're really rolling. This is the new tire I had fitted to the 17-inch wheel. It's a Muscular Marathon, typically rated for large heavy cruiser motorcycles. It's the exact same wheel now and the exact same tire that I'm running on the Tug. So all around I've got 17-inch wheels. Again, you can see kind of the difference between the two, how they compare to each other in their size. So what were the odds that I was going to be able to just basically throw a 17-inch wheel on for the purchase of a couple of bolts and spacers for the fender and a washer? And that washer was only needed because the old washer was kind of chewed up for some reason. Maybe it's just that there's some sort of standard English axle size, that everything has the same axle. I doubt that, but I sure hit the jackpot on this one because that wheel fit like a glove and I like it. I also kind of liked the that open look that that 17-inch laced wheel gave me, even though eventually I would fill in some of that with a brake. Hello again. So, quick rundown. The I have a 1998 Triumph Thunderbird Sport that has twin discs on the front, 17-inch laced wheel, and on the rear an 18-inch laced wheel. And like I think nearly all Triumphs of the era, going onwards for a decade or more after that, they carried Nissan NISSAN calipers. Those calipers all pretty much look identical. I even went online and asked in T300 groups, which is the nature of this tug, and people said, yeah, they're all identical. And in fact, for the most part, I think, in fact, as you look at it closely, there are two different castings, but that also those castings do look nearly identical. But there is the rub, because to quote the Bard, yeah, things are not identical. I also asked the question that was it true that all three discs rotors were identical, and everybody said they were. Now, there's so much tomfoolery around here because I myself had already replaced the rear rotor and rebuilt that rear caliper. So I should have known better. But I proceeded to collect most of the parts I needed. One of the things I decided early on, or that just seemed apropos to me, was I had a Triumph wheel on the Sidecar now, or not really, I mean, not that it was made specifically by Triumph, made by some wheel company. So I started looking at the caliper bracket that comes on the rear of the Thunderbird Sport, and it looked to me suspiciously as if it would fit. I could turn it around upside down backwards, that it would fit on the larger portion of the hub. I know this is boring, but of that axle that was on the Sidecar. And that if I could get that to fit, then I would have everything would work. You know, I have a number of spare calipers, all different types, like, as it turned out, and so there you go. That was my initial thought, was I was going to reuse that bracket and figure out the rest of the engineering as it went, and so that we had some fun. You know, anytime I start a project like this, and here I am right at the beginning, I've purchased a few extra parts to see how they might fit in there. You can see the bracket down there on the concrete. Got that off eBay. I hate taking things apart because I like riding on this rig, and I have no idea how long it's going to take me before I want to get everything back together. It's not that hard to do, but as you can see right here, I discovered that bracket was not going to line up with the hole through the wheel, given a 6-point disc. A 6-bolt disc, excuse me. I got a lot busier with the project after I moved into the new garage up at the house we're building. So then I had a flat place to work. That made a huge difference. Wow, what a surprise. And had a table and bench to work on and that type of thing. So you see, as I go through here, I'm assembling the parts. That's the bracket on the left that turned out to be entirely unusable. It cannot be disassembled in any way. There's the new disc. I see that's a 5-bolt disc that I was planning to put on a 6-bolt wheel at that time. I had to return that rotor. There you can see the those bushings, how nicely they fit. I have a selection of bushings I can use, and all ready to make everything work just perfectly. Only I was actually a long ways to the end of the story. Transfer that, just go into the big time. Now I start to tumble to things. Here's a 6-bolt disc compared to that 5-bolt disc rotor that I was planning to use. So, starting to figure out that I was going to need a 5-bolt rotor at 850 millimeters, a 6-bolt rotor at 850 millimeters, in order to use the bracket that I'd already had machined. My choices weren't that good. Trying to measure things was kind of interesting. Over time, I did learn a great deal about the Triumph brakes that were on those T300s. For example, you can find both 310 millimeter and 320 millimeter rotors for the front. The Thunderbird Sport, listed 1998, as 310 millimeter rotors. And as I mentioned earlier, I myself had already replaced all this stuff or had it on and off several times. I never really noticed the difference. I never noticed that the rotor on the rear was a 5-bolt pattern, or the rotor in the front was a 6-bolt pattern, and therefore the wheel on the sidecar was a 6-bolt pattern. And I was going to use the bracket, the caliper bracket from the rear of a Thunderbird Sport. So that meant, obviously, I was going to use that 310 millimeter 5-bolt rotor, the unicorn that doesn't exist. So, indeed, the rotor at the end of the Triumph is 185 millimeters. It's not 310. So the bracket works correctly, if you can get it to work at all. Was only going to work with a 185 millimeter rotor. So my solution in the end was to get a 310 millimeter rotor. I got that from Niche, probably the least expensive provider. And I found a machinist who could cut it down and I made my own 850 millimeter rotor. And that was the beginning of starting to get everything together. Yeah, all things were not together correctly yet, though. There was more to be the story. So here you can see the 6-bolt rotor I got from Niche, and then I just put on some tape, kind of mark out, see how that was going to look. It was cut back to 185 millimeters. And looking here at what I was going to have to do to the bracket to get it to work. I was even thinking of cutting and welding the bracket, which I didn't have to do. I did have to, like I said, grind off that tower thing. So there you see the thing starting to fit together. That's the way it's supposed to go on the bike. That wonderful rotor, that wonderful caliper that's sitting on there with almost what looked like new pads in it, actually. And this was just not going to work. Now you can see I've got the rotor cut down and I'm ready to rock and roll. It doesn't matter that those holes were cut through like that. It just doesn't make any difference at all. And as we move forward here, some of the last scenes of the wheel as it was before I start putting things together. So pretty much as I had expected, the closer I get to having things put together, the last of the minute details, the things that I just thought would just kind of work out. So much of these things that already fit without issue. So I went through several iterations on getting a proper bushing. I ended up having it made for me. To begin with, I bought a bushing from Grainger, a bronze bushing that was perfect. I just needed the bracket, the Triumph bracket, rear bracket, bored out for that bushing. But it was overbored slightly, so the machinist agreed to make a new bushing that would fit perfectly, and he did so. A nice aluminum bushing, which is in there being used now. And aluminum's plenty strong. So, but the other thing I found was after bolting everything up, that it's hard to describe exactly. When you're using any caliper on a rotor, you kind of have a strong direction and a weak direction. And so braking forces are smaller in reverse, so the weak direction of the rotor, which has the pads colliding with the retention pins, is in reverse, and the forward direction, the pads brace directly against the body of the caliper. And I had that backwards. So I eventually fixed all of that, and I'll explain how I did that. But the other thing that clued me to, two things hit me at the same time. You'll see some of these pictures here. It's the caliper I had planned to use, only it turned out to be a completely unusable caliper. So it was impossible to disassemble it. It was too corroded. It looked beautiful on the outside, and inside it was gone. So here you can see it's really starting to come together. Got the rotor on the wheel, and I bought a new shock absorber, quite expensive actually for the, but it turned out the old shock was really shot. And there's the Willwood proportioning valve that I ended up not using. There's the caliper. Now here's what the problem is. The way that's mounted, the pins are at the top. So the strong braking force was going to go against the pins. This was just not going to work. So this is the carrier for the sidecar disc brake that will fits that wheel. That is the rear carrier and caliper that is actually from that bike, the tug, working on the front wheel from that bike, the tug. All the wheels are the same diameter. And all the calipers actually have the same pads, although the rotors themselves are different. Toodaloo. It really did look like it was going to work. I mean, it was a slow comprehension to realize. Now here I am, I'm rebuilding the caliper that I actually need to use, particularly since I was unable to rebuild the one that I couldn't use. And I don't know if I'm a great fan of the Nissan calipers, but it is what it is. That's what the Triumphs were fitted with for a very, very long time, and a good many of them still are. I don't know what suspension is really the characteristics of the suspension on this sidecar. It looks very primitive to me. It looks like something that would have been designed at the time of when Queen Elizabeth I was still alive, but hard to know. In any case, it works. It has only a little bit of play in it, a little bit of, how would you say, travel to it, and that's all. These are the new rotors. They're actually made in Italy that I got for the front. And they were very good. They still are very good. I'm very happy with having them. These are Brembo rotors. I think they were NOS from our kit that was an upgrade for the original brakes in the bike. I had a pretty good collection of calipers and whatnot. And I had a single unused or unused left side caliper for a Thunderbird Sport, for the left and the front. Indeed, that is the only caliper that one can use and apply as I'm planning to use it in the rear. To make a very long story short, to get that caliper to fit, I end up, as I indicated, the original caliper's support bracket is flipped around, turned upside down and backwards, and I'm actually bolting the reused front caliper to the opposite side of the bracket. And the bracket was originally built with a tower fitting on it, which I ground off with a grinder. And that didn't quite line up. I've actually ended up getting things lined up pretty well. It's all working fine. But I had to modify the bracket even further to get it to fit. And I did that using just an angle grinder with a grinding wheel on it. So not very elegant, but it worked, and it got together. So eventually I have the front caliper from the left front of a Triumph Thunderbird Sport now mounted successfully, I think, at the rear on the sidecar, turned around upside down and backwards. So what could go wrong? This is a new Hagon shock that I got from Watsonian. It's at least nice and shiny and doesn't have perished rubber bits on the ends like the other one did. You know, at the time I was taking these photos, I was still actually quite proud. I guess I am proud of what ended up happening. We can see the retaining pins on this caliper are still facing the wrong way. You see, I rebuilt the wrong caliper again at this point. I had yet another caliper to rebuild. Fortunately, I had a number of spare rebuild kits laying around. I don't know why. I now have a number of rebuilt calipers that are not going to be used. But here I am modeling, if you will, a configuration that is not usable and would never support offensive or strong braking action as planned. This is a view of the original location where I tapped into the hydraulic system for the brakes. I later moved that directly to the master cylinder. Just one of my lab assistants helping out for the day. I reach a point where everything's bolted up. I ordered some hydraulic lines, the brake lines. They all work perfectly. Everything's working perfectly. And I was unable to bleed the line that went to the sidecar. It's a long line. It had a number of like S curves in it. So over a period of weeks, I actually took trips with the sidecar and just connected the darn thing. Meanwhile, because I had also replaced the rotors on the front, I had the best damn brakes on the front that I've ever seen on that car. They were like holding onto a stone in your right hand. It was really nice. Again, making a long story short, I started out buddy bleeding. Then I had a vacuum bleeder. Vacuum bleeder, to really use one effectively, I think you have to both Teflon tape the threads on the bleeder, and then probably grease on the outside as well to keep the air bubbles from coming in. Okay, and then the problem with all of this was I needed to be at the master cylinder. At the same time, I needed to be over at the wheel cylinder to see if air is still coming out or not. And I'm only one person, so I couldn't do that. So I tried over and over again. I have a pressure bleeder. There's some interesting pictures of trying to get a pressure bleeder to seal at the master cylinder. I had some brake fluid explosions. I'm not sure, but it appears that synthetic .4 brake fluid, which I'm using, is not as corrosive as ordinary brake fluid would have been, or it wouldn't have paint on anything anymore. So I'll give you the last roll up in a minute of exactly how all of this came to, how I finished everything. So it's difficult to get a pressure bleeder for an old master cylinder like this. They don't really make adapters for it. I can make my own adapter. In fact, I kind of plan to. Then I was looking into it. It's going to probably take $50 just in materials to do it. So a set of clamps and wood clamps and such. But you do get some explosions along the way, brake fluid explosions. A lot of fun, really. This is just a bit of detail on where I now attach the line that goes to the sidecar brake. And it's actually a priority, so it's the first one in line there. I don't know if that matters, but given the number of times I had to bleed it, I guess it might. Here's the the new proportioning valve that I got. I'm very happy with that. It seems to be working perfectly. And I got that from Speedway, I think. And a close-up. We all love close-ups of this kind of thing. And there's how that looks as installed. Now with a, notice that wheel cylinder is all the way at the front. I mean, the caliper is over on the front now and is oriented correctly for getting brake forces applied. So these are close-ups of as built, basically how it looks right now. It's working very well, very happy with the results, and I have the correct forces applied as needed for the caliper to work properly and the brake to work properly. It may be crazy. It's certainly too much brake for a sidecar, but it looks the part, and it's also very adjustable and consistent with the other motorcycle, with the tug. So at the time of this recording, the brake project is completed, at least for the time being. I mean, these things can always be modified and redesigned, as this one has been several times. The results are spectacular, just awesome, just amazing. Couldn't be better. So I thought I'd put a video together of the journey, this little technical journey. I'm going to take you on the journey of exploration for putting a brake on a Watsonian Squire sidecar, because there are so many people out in YouTube land that have a feeling that they need to know. What I'll do is I have a lot of photos, mostly from along that journey, and I'll do some voiceover primarily after this, so you won't have to see too much more video. That's not my intent in any case. So with that, I'll bid you adieu, and we can start our journey with some stills and some voiceover, etc. So I don't know about you, but it's often the case that bleeding brakes can be a real major pain. You get everything together and something, you know. So here's what I went through. I was using a Willwood proportioning valve. I finally decided that that was not the right valve that I wanted to use. I found another one, a micro valve, that was in line as the Willwood would have been, but it also operated in a different range. So it was 0 to 50 instead of 51 to 100. That meant anytime I want to, I can reach around and simply completely turn off hydraulic fluid flow to the sidecar brake. And I thought that valve was going to be great. So when I installed that valve, I bled the first of the long lines and turned it with the valve shut. I put a little fitting on the other end of the valve, bled it out, and indeed the grip at the handlebar was rock solid. So whatever problems I had, I now had isolated to the second half of the hydraulic line. I bled that line. I bled it and bled it and bled it. It was a bleeding experience, let me tell you. And through the help of some friends who made various observations, I moved the tap for the directly to the master cylinder instead of tapping below the triple tree for the hydraulic fluid. I don't know how much difference that made, but I realized that if I wanted to duplicate, and this was mentioned to me, but then it reoccurred to me kind of independently, and then I also know that I remembered somebody had mentioned this to me, but I could bleed the front brakes on the motorcycle so well, and guess what? The bleeding nipples were at the top of those cylinders, of those calipers. And on the rear of the motorcycle, the bleeding nipple is at the top of the caliper. And on the hydraulic clutch, the bleeding nipple is in the top of the bleeding cylinder. And the way I had the sidecar brake set up, the bleeder was at the bottom of the Nissan caliper. Not actually very hard to work with. Fortunately, it's just 2 bolts, 20 foot-pounds each. They just pop off. I could wire tie the caliper up against the frame of the sidecar with the nipple face to the top. I let it sit there for a little while and tapped on it, get a little air out of there, and it was much better after that. What I needed to do, though, was find the correct way of shimming and brace the pads from expanding. Finally, although I couldn't see the little bubbles coming out on my own because I was just using a check valve bleeder up at from the master cylinder, I got the kind of grip I needed, and the brake was working because I had bled the brake with the nipple at the bleeding nipple at the top of the brake cylinder instead of located at the bottom. Just one of those little tricks any owner of this particular sidecar will ever have to know. So that was the final answer. Use the rotor that's the right size for the bracket you're planning to use. Grind the bracket to pieces, even after it's been machined professionally. Mount the correct caliper to it. Rebuild the correct caliper, and then bleed the whole system correctly. And then test ride it and find. I cannot tell you. It works really, really well. I have some potential engineering issues with the way it's mounted, but I will be taking some additional videos. I'm going to take action videos actually of the brake while it's working in order to evaluate whether this is working correctly for me in the long run or not. But it is a breakthrough in terms of driving sidecar, at least with this rig. These were my only leftover parts. Anybody need a proportioning valve? So I actually took a nice ride today with Casey. We went up on Skyline Boulevard and down Highway 9 into Saratoga, etc. And the brake worked very, very well. But I'll make this quick. A couple of observations. I didn't expect perfection, and I didn't get it. So that by that I'm saying this is not something that's so fine-tuned, although it might be fine-tunable, such that you still don't have to do any steering when you're braking. But that was always true. Instead of having to do very muscular steering while you're braking, you don't have to be very muscular now. But you pay attention when you're braking in order to brake and keep the sidecar going straight. That's basically the only thing. The other kind of change is I've eliminated enough of the yaw so that I don't really use yaw to accessorize turning so much. So, which was something that I tended to do before. On the other hand, it appears that trail braking into the corners is working very well, much better than it did before. And that is probably because I'm trail braking with the front brake as expected, as anticipated. And that means I'm slowing the car down at the same time. And since I'm slowing that mass down that's next to the car, next to the tug, the car isn't coming up in the air on right-hand turns. So I can trail brake on right-hand turns, hit them pretty hard, and I have no sensation that the car is going to come up at all. Which now I just have my limitations basically of limited contact patch with skinny tires, 17-inch wheels, and so my wig will skid after a little bit. And that's definitely another thing you want to avoid. Thanks a lot.